legends, and folklore have been shared across various cultures throughout time. Today, we explore how these stories shape our identities. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Commune. This is the paranormal adjacent podcast where we examine the realms of the unexplained through psychological, cultural, and lore point of view. We're not here to prove anything. We're here to try to understand what these experiences do to people. I'm Lalo as a therapist. We'll be providing the psychological perspective. Laramie here's a researcher and brings some of the emotional perspective. Mario brings some of our cultural perspective, and Gaia brings our historical perspective. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Like I said, today we'll be exploring folklore, and if anybody has a story that they want to share, feel free to drop it in the comments. We love to hear what local legends and whatnot you have, and um, I guess we can let Laramie kind of go ahead and get started with it.
Alrighty, so our topic today is folklore, and it's something every culture, it's been recorded from the beginning of time. So folklore is basically a collection of traditional stories, beliefs, customs, songs, sayings, and practices that are passed down in a community from generation to generation. And these are like myths, fairy tales, legends, ghost stories, folk heroes, superstitions, and traditional rituals. So yeah, so going forward, does anybody, what do you guys know about folklore and like the purpose of it? Why do cultures have folklore and such?
Okay. So folklore in Italy and in Europe is something that is old as the continent itself. And it was used at the beginning as a way to pass traditions and then as a way to teach morals and lessons. In the realm of folklore, we have fairy tales. Fairy tales were they started not as ways to put the children to sleep, but they started as a way to teach lessons.
Mhm.
For example, the orcs in the stories, they are usually pedophiles that the older people knew about, and they managed to scare the children enough to make them stay away from the orcs. And that's also why a way to describe a pedophile nowadays in Italy is to call them orcs. But also, folklore is the realm of ghost stories. And we have many ghost stories and haunted places in Florence because being the city being as old as it is, of course, many people, many generations, many historical facts left behind myths and legends that we still uh, talk about nowadays. And after you guys go through what your stories are, I would like to tell the story of one of the most haunted places in Florence that is actually Palazzo Vecchio. And Palazzo Vecchio is the center, from the beginning, is the center of the political power in Florence, and it was the residence of the Medici family. So,
Well, I mean that was part of the thing, right? That stories used to be passed down a lot of times either through songs or word of mouth. Like the whole thing of writing is through human history relatively new. I mean, and that's the thing
yeah.
with ghost stories. Like I think everybody kind of wants to have their legacy. I mean, the thing that comes to mind is almost like some of those pirate songs, where people make songs about like a famous pirate, and they do the shanties and
Oh,
stuff like
seafood
that. Yeah,
shanties.
it's a
Oh,
way
yeah.
to remember, you know. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. And also, the oral tradition is the most ancient way to pass stories and histories. Before, as Lalo said, we started to write them down. for a very long time, historical facts were passed orally from generation to generation. So,
Yeah, I mean, you guys couldn't have said it any better. It's, it's stories, yes, of course, but is there any truth in those stories? That's the main question, though. I guess I'll go ahead and start with one folklore story, um, popular in Mexico, I believe. Um, at least on the area where we live, there's one particular one that caught my attention, and it just came to my mind. And this is the one I'll be sharing today. So in Mexico, in the Catholic religion, I guess, um, you can ask a favor of a saint or even to Jesus or the Virgin, and you ask a favor of them and you promise to do something for them. It's not like they need it, but like let's say you promise to go to their particular church where they're at by doing a sacrifice of either walking all the way there from your city or your town, or there's a lot of people, especially with the Virgin de Guadalupe, there are a lot of people go to her church and they do it kneeled down, from the very entrance all the way back to where she's at. Either way, you can promise whatever you want. There's this thing, especially where we live, in the town that we live, there's a there's a crucifix. It's a big crucifix of Jesus, and they call him Señor de Araro. It's about 30 kilometers from the town where we live, or the city, the small city where we live. And a lot of people make a promise to go to that little small town where that crucifix is, walking. And so this thing that they say that if you start the walk and you don't finish it for whatever reason, you will convert yourself into rock. Yeah, yeah, it's yeah. If you don't make it for some reason, or you don't make it to to that church, you will pretty much become a rock, and you have to like wait for somebody to pass by and convince them to take you there. There have been stories told about, guys that are walking and all of a sudden hearing a noise, and these rocks talking to them and asking for the favor of taking them to that church because they weren't able to do the trip. Yeah, it's the one that came to mind. I don't know why, but it's there's a lot of them, of course, but this
There's one
particular
that's
one caught my attention. It's it's pretty much, I guess, telling you that if you make a promise, you know, you have to finish it regardless.
there's one that's very similar, and it actually ends up with you being turned as a rock as well. There's a mountain people like to go hike. And I used to hear the story that there at times was this woman that showed up, and she basically would say that she needed to be carried to the church, um, and that if you carried her, basically she would grant you a wish. Um, but you could not turn back, like no matter what, you know?
You cannot look back.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was what I mean by not turn back. Like you cannot look back at all. Like, if you hear like a family member like dying behind you, right? It's like if you do, you get turned into a rock, and that's kind of the same thing that some of the rocks around there are just people who never made it.
it, it's
That,
so fun because the trope of not turning back is present in many cultures. For example, the myth of Orpheus and
yeah.
Eurydice.
Yeah.
She
But it,
died. He went to the Greek version of hell to get her back. Hades granted him permission to take her back into the human world, but only if he promised to never turn back. But at some point, Orpheus turned because he couldn't hear her anymore, and she was taken back into the dead world. And the moral is you cannot revert death. Even if the gods grant you this wish, it's not in the human nature to revert death.
Well, remember
So
that
it,
that passage from the Old Testament where God saved whatever his name and his wife were from Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember,
Why?
where he
yeah,
was about to set him on fire, and he's like, "Don't look back, because otherwise you will turn into salt rock."
yeah,
Yeah.
And his wife looked back, and she turned into salt. So it's
Temptation.
yeah.
I think that
I
there's
guess in a way, I want to say that in a way it has to do with all that that's in the Bible there. It's yeah, it's there were very interesting things. I've never seen anything like that. I've heard numerous stories about those kinds of things from older people like my grandparents. They would tell us those stories and everything, and I'm sure they heard them from their grandparents, or their fathers, or older elder people. So it just comes to show that from generation to generation, those stories just keep passing down, and
but it,
I
it
wonder if
becomes
there's some truth to that. It just
part
makes you
of
wonder.
it becomes part of the identity, like it's like a
Yeah.
for a while again, whenever I heard that story, it was like the mountain was called like the bull, the mountain of the bull. um and it's like every time I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's the place. It's like that's the place. Yeah. So
No, yeah, I mean, you guys basically have touched on like all of the purposes for folklore stories, the teaching the lessons about moral values and practical wisdom. Like here in the US we have like not necessarily nursery rhymes, but like kid stories, like Little Red Riding Hood. It's about not trusting strangers. And then even in like there's one even in West African and Caribbean lore about Anansi, who is a spider, a trickster spider, and basically saying that, you don't have to have brute strength to complete your goal. You can use intellect. And then of course, like Lala mentioned, the preserving the culture and identity, how hearing those stories, then you can go and when you see them, then it's like, oh, hey, I remember those stories. One of the other big things is explaining the unknown. Um, I know in like one of the big things in Roman and Greek mythology, a lot of times they're the same kind of stories, different names and such, but like the story of Hades and Persephone, that's how they explained winter and summer. Why there's 6 months of winter, 6 months of summer because they didn't have the scientific knowledge. So that's another thing. But also sometimes the folklores, the stories are just about providing entertainment because remember they didn't necessarily back in the days they didn't have televisions or internet or that kind of stuff. They had to come up with their own form of entertainment. Um, and then reinforcing social rules, encouraging behaviors that help the community stay safe. The boogeyman, oh, don't go out after night at dark because the boogeyman will come and scoop you up and take you away, was to keep children safe. So like all of the folklore and stories, they have some sort of basis
well,
to them.
and you talking about unexplaining or explaining the unexplained. Now, from a kind of psychological standpoint, it's part of our survival mechanism to make sense of our environment. It's a defense thing where, like, if we don't know what something is or what's causing it, it's essentially a threat to our existence on a biological type level, right? So, and essentially, that's a good bit of even part of what trauma is. It's just an unanswered question. So, a lot of it is we need answers, even if they're right. I mean, even if they're wrong, even if they make no sense sometimes. Sometimes having an answer, even if it's like terrifying, right, is better than not having an answer. And
Hmm.
there's a place near kind of where we grew up in North Carolina called Brown Mountain Lights, which, I'm sure it's been in some movies. Everybody um, who's especially into kind of like all this kind of stuff probably has heard of the Brown Mountain Lights at some point, and from there it's like you have all kinds of different theories. Some people and basically what it is, it's there's an overview and of a mountain called Brown Mountain, and you see some lights. Um, some speculations is that they're tied to aliens and UFOs. Some are that they're ghosts back from slave times. Um, and you've had all kinds of entities come in. You've had the National Weather Service. You've had Project Blue Book come in. You've had, a whole bunch of different things, and they just haven't found an answer. And, sometimes, yeah, sometimes it's good to kind of spice it out, make it a little bit more entertaining. But, at the end of the day, I think a lot of times it's just, we just kind of feel that need to know for our own comfort and safety.
Yeah. And
Folklore
about,
is also one of those things that, sorry,
no, no, go,
as
go,
I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, folklore is one of those things that kind of like give you that identity as well culturally, because like we were talking about, everybody's got their own stories that somehow you feel identified to them, and it kind of defines where you come from and who you are. You know, as somebody from Mexico, you hear, stories like La Llorona, los chaneques, nahuales, just to mention a few. It's some of those things that I've heard since I was a little kid, and it's part of my background, part of my culture, part of what I identify with. Um, you know, it's 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 there, I guess, as well. Like you were saying, teach you a lesson, stories and everything, but also define you as a person. Um, because now you can go out and share those stories about your culture with other people and tell them, listen, over here where I live, or where I'm from, we have this particular situation going on. And it's interesting as well how, especially, you go to another other countries or other continents, and they have very similar stories as the ones we have. Again, whether they're true or not, or something is happening, I've always been of the thinking that if the river makes a noise, it's because it's carrying water. So I'm sure there's something to that.
And I'm pretty sure that the reason why we have similar stories with different names is because at the end of the day, all those stories, they are rooted into the same place. The need, as Lalo said, the need to explain what is impossible to explain. Why did the mother kill her children? Why did a woman kill herself? Why a whole family was destroyed in this or that way for something that happened to one or more of them? And so at the end of the day, yes, we changed the name, but the root is the same. We need to explain and to understand
Mhm.
things that are impossible to explain and understand. For example, I was thinking about the changeling legends
Mhm.
that nowadays we know um, it was a way to explain two things. Children who died in their cribs without reasons, and also children who were neurodivergent without knowing what that means. So it was easier to explain that the child was actually changed with a fairy than to try to explain autism, for example, because they didn't have the tools to explain being neurodivergent back in the days. And so the legend started with, oh, yeah, that baby, he is so strange. He doesn't speak, he doesn't look at you in the eyes because he was changed with a fairy baby. And now they are forced to live in a world that it's not their own world. It's easier. And also the Russian legend of the witch Baba Yaga. It was a way to explain what is impossible to explain, that sometimes there are people so evil that they will steal your children from your houses
So can you
to
tell
know
me a
them.
little bit about that legend, just to those that aren't familiar?
The legend of Baba Yaga.
Yeah.
She is she is said to be a very powerful and very ancient witch who would use your children as the main ingredient in her potions and rituals. But
Mm.
also, Baba Yaga only takes the children who misbehave. So, if your children are good kids, Baba Yaga will stay away. And it's also a little bit like Bloody Mary. If you call her name 3 times, she will appear. But if you call her, you need to be ready to pay the price.
Sounds like Bloody
Again,
Mary.
Bloody Mary was these. Um, there are many versions
Oh yeah.
of the legend, but basically, she was the most famous. She was a maiden or something that committed very, very heinous crimes. And
She
so,
was the one that would bathe in the blood of,
yeah, not that,
of virgin women, to keep beauty. That was
yes,
why. That's one of the
yeah,
stories of Bloody
yeah, one of the
Mary.
story is
Yeah.
that one. And so, if you stand in front of a mirror and you call her name 3 times, she will appear. And that's what the legend will say. I wouldn't suggest you to try it at home, but hey, it's a free word, so if you really want to do it, don't blame us, okay? Also, the same with Baba Yaga. But I think for Baba Yaga, you have to call her in Russian, so it's a little bit more complicated. So, but again, I wouldn't suggest to try it at home if you have children, just to be safe.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's I know some people might think that those things aren't real and everything, and that's the way it all starts by saying, "Oh, it ain't real. Nothing's gonna happen," and then they go out and do them dumb things, I call them, and things do happen.
Yeah, and
So
like
Yeah,
one of the interesting things, in my research, it kind of summarizes folklore is that folklore isn't about proving facts. It's not about that. It's about understanding human culture, memory, and belief, and explaining why it is in a different kind of almost fun way that people will remember. I mean, because some people, not always remember the facts, or it's like you got to be like the numbers and everything. They remember stories. Our brains are better at processing things that have kind of a fantasy element to them that kind of pique our interest, instead of just cold hard numbers. So that's basically what the folklore is. The basis of it is trying to do is somehow ingrain these important lessons, these memories, these experiences in a way that people will remember them.
that's that's
yeah,
very true.
very, very, it's very interesting. And again, we'll go back to the whole: is it real? Is it not real? You
Hmm.
know, I like to focus a lot on that because again, we go back to the whole thing of nothing's going to happen and all this and all that. Stories are there for a reason. A lot of people, I know they've been passed from generation to generation, and some of them might not be true, but there's a lot of them that are true. And of course, which ones are and which ones aren't, it's I've always looked at it this way. If it looks dangerous, let's not touch it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of like common sense to to a sense. There's a lot of common sense when you hear a story, you know. It's like somebody tells me, yeah, step right on the edge of the of that bridge out there. Nothing will happen. You'll be okay. The wind is very high, but you'll be all right, and you'll feel that really nice feeling. Now, am I really gonna go out there and step right on the edge of that bridge with the high winds? Probably not, because I know that's dangerous. So you hear a story like that you were talking about, am I going to stand in the mirror and call that entity 3 times? It's one of those things that I like, rather leave it alone. And going back to what I always said, the evil exists, the the devil's out there to get us, and we just have to be careful. And some of
Yeah.
these stories are there to try to steer us away from falling into his webs. Yeah.
And as many would say, behind every legend, there is a part of the truth.
There
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And I mean, and maybe as the story gets passed down through generation, especially when it's oral, things it's like a game of telephone. And especially with things becoming more modern, there are different aspects to the story, but ultimately every story comes from something. There was a reason why this story was made up, was told, whether it was as a warning or as entertainment, but like I said, every legend has some kernel of truth.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a bunch of them that are made up and just entertainment, but
Hmm.
they're just like there are some entertainment ones. I know that, and I've heard from a lot of people, especially one of them being my dad, that, for example, La Llorona is a real entity out there. My dad, he's got a personal experience with that particular entity that happened to him when he was young, and to this day I know until the day he passes, he will not forget. And he's told me the story a couple of times, and I guess one day when we do a podcast related to La Llorona and everything, I will be able to tell that particular story and how it everything went down. But where I'm getting at is, it's one of those things. That particular story, for example, I believe it to be true. And and I will never try the Bloody Mary thing because, of course, it's one of those things that is messing with evil entities.
Yeah. And I mean, I know like growing up, my father would always say, at night at nighttime it's like, oh, if you have to go outside for some reason, you better be quick and come right back or the wildcats will get you. Living in South Carolina, I mean, especially in Columbia and the city area, we don't really have wildcats. I mean, yeah, you might go out more into like the boony areas of South Carolina. You might run into some, mountain lion, like cougars and such. But the most thing we have here is like our coyotes. But I mean, as a kid, I remember that scared me. I'm like, well, I don't want to spend time outside. But again, that was a
Hmm.
safety thing, but it was told in such a way that it wasn't, like you do this, this will happen. Because a lot of times when you say that to a young kid or a teenager, they're like, oh, well, okay, well, I'm gonna go do it then. But saying something like that was kind of scary, thinking, oh my gosh, something could be stalking me in the dark, some wildcat. And I would always make sure I was home. If I had to go out to get something, it was very a quick trip out in the dark. So,
Well, I also wonder how many stories just kind of happen more or less by accident. Like,
hmm.
if somebody was like drunk, they were on drugs, they were very like sleep deprived, and saw like a scarecrow, right? Like out from a distance, and it's like, oh, it's the Hat Man or something, right? Um, Because a lot of these things can also kind of happen from kind of, again, people's different experiences, right? But regardless of it, right? If you see something, if it feels real to you, it's going to scare the heck out of you, you know?
Hmm.
So like, and, again, if it was particularly more, again, along those days, especially when I can't just pull out my phone, right, and be like, oh, look, there it is, right? I'm probably going to be telling my kids, it's like, hey, don't go down that way, right? Bad stuff happens down that way.
Yeah, so I know like from South Carolina, we have two of our most famous, and one of them is probably one that most people have heard of is the Lizard Man of Scape Swamp. And so this was back in 1988 in Bishopville, South Carolina. That's a very out there kind of boony kind of place. And if there's anybody, listening to this that does live in Bishopville and may have had an encounter with this lizard man, definitely please share. But a teenager reported encountering this 7 foot tall reptilian creature with red eyes near a swamp. And then residents were starting to experience strange sightings and unexplained damage to their vehicles. Well, this actually attracted national media and became our very own cryptid. So, um, this was a famous, and they even have a festival. And I mean, and if you go to Bishopville, of course, it's become kind of using the lizard man. There's a lot of touristy kind of things to it, but then you can also, go try to see it in the swamp. And then another one, or actually, it's a famous ghost story,
Hmm.
comes from the Polly's Islands. Those are one of our famous islands, beaches, and it's a ghostly figure that appears on the beaches before major hurricanes. Um, Said to people who see him and heed the warning, survive the storm. And again, this story could also be kind of rooted in, hey, if there's a major hurricane coming, you should probably evacuate. Like, I know there's people that want to ride out the storm, but those that might be better to evacuate are more likely to survive or not have as much damage. So while it's a ghost story that's kind of famous, there's also a little bit of that cautionary. It's like, hey, if you do see this gray man, it's best to kind of to book it. So a little bit from the South Carolina neck of the woods, but yeah, what about you, Gaia and Florence?
Oh, we have many ghost stories in Florence and many haunted places that are, above all, private residences or hotels. We have a very famous hotel that is Hotel Burchianti, where even Mussolini stayed when he visited Florence before World War II. And the legend says it's one of the most haunted places in Europe because um, back at the beginning of the last century, it hosted a whole class of girls from Switzerland visiting Florence for the summer break. But a huge fire happened, and the majority of them died. And since then, the rooms they occupied, even after restoration and everything, the rooms they occupied uh, during summer, people said they could see young girls running around the corridors and disappearing into the walls. They are not dangerous ghosts, they are just there. I think if you want to believe, it's because their energies remained behind. And another very haunted place in Florence is Piazza della Signoria, that is right in front of Palazzo Vecchio. But the most interesting ghost story of Palazzo Vecchio is that people claim they saw the ghost of Bianca Cappello. Bianca Cappello was a noblewoman from Venice. She lived her life in a very, very controversial way. She left Venice, and her mother was Pellegrina Morosini, and the Morosini's family is one of the richest and most ancient families in Venice, and it gave Venice many, many doges who were the rulers of Venice. So she ran from Venice because she fell in love with a nobleman in Florence, and she married him against Venice's will. And the nobleman was a Salviati, but they were noble only in name because they had lost all their money during the time. So Venice asked her back, but the Grand Duke said no. She's under Florence protection because she is married to a Florentine man. So she stayed in Florence. But then the Grand Duke's son fell in love with her. And she was married, he was married, they began an affair. A son was born. But Francesco, who was the lover, was married and finally had a legitimate son with his wife. So Bianca's position became really unstable because yes, she had a son, but he was illegitimate, so he was out the line of succession, and that made her role really dangerous because the Medici's family was against her. But Francesco's wife died, and Francesco became Grand Duke of Tuscany. And her husband died in a dark alley one night out of nowhere. Yeah. And so they were finally free and they married against the consent of Francesco's younger brother, who was also a cardinal at the time. So the church was against Bianca Cappello, and the Medici's family was against Bianca Cappello until 1587. One night, Bianca and Francesco died at Villa Medici in Poggio a Caiano. How? Well, at first, the doctor said it was malarian fever. But then Ferdinando, who was Francesco's brother, became Grand Duke of Tuscany. And he made sure the funerals happened very fast. Francesco was put to rest in the family chapel. And Bianca Cappello was, because she wasn't an official member of the Medici's family, she was put in an unmade grave in San Lorenzo. Many, many centuries after it happened, it came out that there were traces of arsenic in their blood and bodies, so they were indeed killed. And even nowadays, Bianca Cappello walks through the corridors of Palazzo Vecchio, haunting the rooms where her death was probably decided.
Interesting.
That's so
That's a
sad.
very nice story.
Yeah.
I'll tell you guys a story that it's going to serve as a good example of a made-up story that kind of helped back in the revolutionary days in Mexico. And this is a story that was told by my grandparents, my grandfather more than anything. So back in the old, very old days. I don't know exactly the year, but it was back in during the revolutionary days. They wanted to do a curfew for the small town that where we come from, and so they they told them that they started telling the people that they have to be inside their houses and no one could be out after midnight. Like literally, there could not be anybody out after midnight because there would be two entities or two demons from the mountains that surround the town. Like I think Lalo touched on it earlier today. The Cerro del Toro, the mountain of the bull, and there was another mountain very close to it, it's the mountain of the goat. And so the story was that they would come down, or two entities, one that looked like a bull and one that looked like a goat, would come down to the very plaza of the town, and they would fight, and you couldn't be out because otherwise it'd be such a traumatic experience you would probably die. And it kind of helped keep people inside their houses during that whole time, because of the curfew. And it's one of those stories that it's still told, um, and it's still passed. That at one point, El Cerro del Toro, or the mountain of the bull and the mountain of the goat, don't get along, and their spirits, or the goat and the bull will come down and fight each other on certain days on the town plaza. But it was all it served more of a curfew, to let people know stay in your houses, because these weird things are happening out in town. But it's all
Yeah.
part of the folklore. It's all stories again.
But
That one in particular, I don't quite believe, but it was there, and people believed it at one point,
Yeah.
and
but
it
it's
kept people
interesting.
inside their houses.
These stories almost become like a time capsule as well.
Yeah,
You
Mhm.
know, both what Gaia and Mario shared. They're moments in time that are just kind of frozen now for eternity in some ways. You know, I think that there's something beautiful about that.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, so I guess any closing thoughts from anyone?
I think folklore is whatever people need it to be. You can believe in the stories, you can not believe in the stories, you can follow the teaching, you cannot follow the teaching. At the end of the day, it's up to the people. But I think, as Lalo said, it's it's like a window over a time that is no more, and we should really, really keep it safe
I mean,
because it's a part of our history. It's a part of us. So
yeah, and I think I personally, I mean, I believe that the best way to understand a culture or a people or a community is listening to their stories because that can share so much. You can learn so much about them, about their past, about their history, their makeup, just by their stories. And I think that's the beautiful thing is that you have these almost built-in kind of um like like chapter like a chapter list kind of thing. You have it because it's there. You just have to listen and take it in and respect it, and learn from it. Because again, it might be told from a different culture with different characters, but more likely than not, it's going to be something you've experienced. And you're going to have something very similar in your life and heard of a story similar to that. And I think that's just what connects us as human beings. That no matter where we come from, we have some kind of shared story, history.
Yeah, you couldn't have said it any better. Yeah, like I said earlier, it kind of defines who you are, where you're from, just by hearing the stories. You know, you hear the name Tuscany and you think Italy, or you think Europe. You hear La Llorona, and the first thing you hear is Mexico. And things like that. So this folklore, these stories, they define you. They kind of are able to share a little bit of what you are and who you are. So
And we'll
just
definitely
be
get
careful with
into
what you do with them. Again,
yeah, we'll
um,
definitely get into more specific ones as
yeah,
well later on in the podcast. I'm sure we'll more specifically dissect some of these fascinating stories.
And if
And
you're watching this and you have, like we said kind of in the beginning, and you have a story or folklore or legend or some sort from your culture you're growing up that you want to share, please do. I mean, we would love to hear it.
yeah, drop it in our comments and maybe everybody can kind of share and we can learn a little bit about different places of where everyone is from. So, all right. Well,
that's
thank
it for
you
me.
all for being here, and until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.